Hello everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mir Hashem Daf Mem Tes Amid Beis, and I hope a good piece of Daf Nun Amid Aleph as well. So we're continuing to learn Hilchos Tainis. We pick up today on Mem Tes Amid Beis in Siman Tavkuf Ayin Vav Sif Beis, where we are discussing different sorts of tsaros, different sorts of calamities and troubles and trials that may chas v'chalila come to disturb Klal Yisrael, and when we fast and when we blow shofar. Says the Mechaber in Sif Beis, V'chein al hadever, if chas v'chalila there is a deadly plague, so then also we fast and we blow shofar. Now the Mechaber goes to define what exactly constitutes a dever. When do we consider something to be a deadly plague? Ezehu dever, what constitutes dever? Ir sheyesh ba chamesh me'os ragli, a city that has 500 strong men, 500 able-bodied men. V'yatzu mimenu shloisha mesim b'shloisha yamim zeh achar zeh. And then what happens is you have 3 days where one otherwise healthy, strong man dies 3 days in a row. So for 3 days in a row, one day one person dies unexplainedly, the next day a second person dies unexplainedly, the third day another person dies unexplainedly. That harei zeh dever, that constitutes a dever. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Beis, al hadever. So the first thing the Mishnah Berurah says is v'ha'idna ein misanin klal b'shas hadever. Nowadays we do not fast over a deadly plague. Why? Because it's tried and proven that if there is chas v'chalila, a deadly plague, and then people go ahead and they don't eat and they don't drink, by doing so they weaken their constitution and they weaken their immune system, and then kaileit shinoi aver chas v'shalom, and then they could be struck by this plague. Now the words shinoi aver, literally it means an atmospheric change, a change in the climate, a change in the air. And it seems that what the Mechaber is talking about over here, it seems to me that over here at Sif Beis, when we discuss a dever, it sounds like the Mechaber is not really speaking about a communicable disease as much as he's talking about some kind of plague where just people are just dying. And that's why he calls it shinoi avir. It's something that's seasonal, it's something that's being caught from outside, whatever kind of disease this is. And if you weaken the immune system and you weaken your physical constitution, you may become susceptible to it, and therefore he says we don't fast. He sends us back to Hilchos Tisha B'Av Tavkuf Nun Daled Sivav in a Berurah halacha, and we learned that Berurah halacha back when we were learning Hilchos Tisha B'Av, and it has interesting ramifications for nowadays. Unfortunately, with this COVID pandemic that we're still living through, the Berurah halacha over there brings down the Sefer Pischei Olam, and he says the mamakam she'ein hamachala shel cholera chazaka chas v'shalom. He says that if on Tisha B'Av there is some kind of plague going around, he says if it's not a calamitous plague of cholera, if it's a very powerful plague of cholera, then you simply cannot fast. But if it's not a terrible plague of cholera, then people should eat pachas mikashir, v'chein b'shtia, and they should drink pachas mikashir, k'meisha kasav ha'shiyurim b'shulchan aruch siman tav reish yud ches. If there isn't a powerful plague going on and somebody does want to fast, you should advise him and warn him that you should not leave your house. Quarantine. If there's a plague going on, says the Berurah halacha from the Pischei Olam, quarantine. And then to adjure him that when he does go out of his home, if somebody has to go out, Yisa saviv lechatmai upiv chaticha kempfer. He should put on some kind of cloth over his nose and his mouth. He should put on a mask. Uma'at esev miate, and he should put some kind of an herb. This miate, I don't know what it is. Ad kan l'shaynai. But here you see quarantine and masks. That's what the Berurah halacha says. In a time of a plague, chas v'chalila, quarantine, if you do have to go out, you go out with a mask. Now again, I'm learning over here in Siv Beis that when we're speaking about a dever, about a plague, this is something that the Mechaber seems to be addressing where we don't know what it is. We don't understand what's happening. All we see is that Nebuch, people are dying. So on one day, a perfectly healthy person died. The next day, another perfectly healthy person died. The third day, another perfectly healthy person died. So in a relatively small population, where in that city you have 500 able-bodied men, besides the women and the children and the senior citizens and everything else, but there are 500 able-bodied men, and you have in 3 days in a row, one person drop dead each day. That's a dever. And by a dever, that's what the Mechaber is speaking about over here. He says you fast. 3 people die. It means meis echad b'chol yom. One person dies each day. So now let's go back here into the Mechaber. I'm just going to read from the beginning. V'chein al hadever, we fast and we blow shofar for a dever. Ezehu dever, what's a dever? Ir sheyesh ba chamesh me'os ragli, if you have a city that has 500 able-bodied men, and 3 people die in 3 days, one day after the other, I raise a dever. That's a dever. Yatsu b'yom echad, if 3 people die over the course of 1 day, or if 3 people die over the course of 4 days, ein zeh dever. That does not constitute a dever. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Daled, ein zeh dever, that's not a dever. The ein zeh keva, ela akroi ba'alma. When you have 3 days where one person dies on Sunday, one person dies on Monday, one person dies on Tuesday, this is some kind of a plague. This is every day a person dies. If 1 day 3 people die, okay, that's an akroi ba'alma, that's a crazy thing that happened. But that doesn't show the pattern of a plague. If 3 people died over 4 days, it's not a close enough time period that we should say that there's a terrible, powerful plague going on. Now, so far, the Mechaber spoke about a city that has 500 able-bodied men. Continues the Mechaber, Hayuba Elef. Let's say it's a larger city. There are 1,000 able-bodied men. So then you double it proportionately. If 6 people die in 3 days, 1 day after the other, that means 2 people on Sunday, 2 people Monday, 2 people Tuesday. Harei a dever. It's proportionate. That's a dever. Yatsu b'yom echad. If the 6 people died in 1 day, or over the course of 4 days, ein zeh dever. That's not a dever. V'chein lefi cheshbon zeh. And this is the mathematical calculation that you use. So it seems to me, if I'm doing my math correctly, it's 0.02% of the able-bodied male population. And we do not take into consideration the population of women, children, and older men who are already retired, who don't do work anymore. Why? Not because they matter any less, chas v'chalila. The reason we don't count them, says the Mishnah Berurah, is because because by nature, these people are weaker. A child is more susceptible to all sorts of diseases. A woman who doesn't work, doesn't engage in physical labor the same way a man does, so by nature she has a weaker constitution. Also, childbearing women go there, it's a tax on their body, it strains their body, it strains their physique. So for different reasons, women are also considered to be more susceptible. Senior citizens are considered to be more susceptible. So when we look at the population, when we see people dying unexplainedly and we want to consider it to be a dever, it's only the able-bodied male population that we look at. Vayin b'lavush, and the Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the lavush. that this is true, the bein minyan achamish me'os ubein minyan amesim lo yiu me'elu. When we say that we don't count the women, the children, and the senior citizens, it means on both ends of the equation. We don't look at them to measure the size of the population, and also we don't look at them, Nabach, if one of them died, we don't factor them in to decide whether or not this is a dever. So if on Sunday a woman died, and then on Monday a man died, and on Tuesday a man died, we don't consider that to be a dever, because we don't look at the unfortunate death of the woman as being the siman of a dever. We don't see it as being a sign of a dever. We see it as being a sign of a person with a weaker constitution who passed away. That doesn't show as a dever. To see a dever, we have to see strong, able-bodied people that are just mysteriously dying. That's how we see a dever. Continues the Mechaber. Haya dever be'eretz Yisrael, if there's an unexplained deadly plague, chas v'chalila, in Eretz Yisrael, misanin shar galuyos aleihem. The rest of the galus, chutz la'aretz, has to fast on behalf of Eretz Yisrael. V'davka deka dever b'kula, but this is only true if chas v'chalila, the dever is striking the entire Eretz Yisrael, v'loi b'miktsasa, but not if it's only striking part of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton vav be'eretz Yisrael. If there's a dever in Eretz Yisrael, chutz la'aretz, the galus has to fast. Why is that? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. The kevan de gevira loike, because we look at Eretz Yisrael as being the mistress, as being the master. So if the master is being struck, shivcha loy kolshkein, so then the servant is certainly being struck. In other words, what we're saying is, we look at this plague and we say, if the Rabbeinu Shalom is bringing a plague on Eretz Yisrael, so then certainly the rest of Chutz La'aretz, the rest of the Golus, is certainly susceptible to this punishment. And therefore, if we see the plague in Eretz Yisrael, even Chutz La'aretz has to fast. Surya Eina B'Chalala Eretz Yisrael, the part of the region that's called Surya, the area that was captured by David HaMelech and incorporated into Eretz Yisrael, is not called Eretz Yisrael in the context of this halacha. The kibush yachid lo yishmei kibush, because we paskin that the conquering that was done by a yachid, even though that yachid was David HaMelech, it was an individual conquest. It wasn't a conquest, so to speak, of a whole Klal Yisrael, and therefore it's not considered incorporated fully into Eretz Yisrael. Ois Katan Zayin, the Mechaber said, the only time the Golus has to fast for a plague in Eretz Yisrael is if the plague strikes the entire Eretz Yisrael. V'loi b'miktsasa, but not if it only strikes part of it. Says the Chavetz Chaim, why is that? To ha'ika gevira gam kein d'nitzailis. The reason the Golus has to fast is because of the logic. If the mistress, if Eretz Yisrael is being struck by a plague, so certainly the Shivcha, certainly Chutz La'aretz, is susceptible to the plague. But over here, not all of Eretz Yisrael was struck. Part of Eretz Yisrael is fine. V'tinotzel im hanitzulin. So then the Golus could look at the part of Eretz Yisrael that's okay and say, all right, maybe we'll be together with them. And the same way they're not being struck, we won't be struck. Continues the Mechaber, 5 lines from the bottom by the Ois Katan Ches for the Mishnah Berurah. Hayadever b'Medina, if there was a deadly plague in one city, v'shayarois halachos ubois mimeno l'Medina acheres, but there are caravans that travel from that city that's suffering from the plague to other cities. Does this sound familiar? If you have a pandemic that begins in Wuhan, China, but you have airplanes that are flying from Wuhan, China, all over the world, shtehen misanois. Both of the cities have to fast. So if the plague starts in Wuhan, China, but we know that there are planes that are going from Wuhan, China to New York, so even if the pandemic hasn't struck New York also has to fast. Even though they're very far apart. Why is that? We know what the answer is. Let's look at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches. Hayadever b'Medina, if there's a deadly plague in one Medina, af b'chutz la'aretz, even if it's in chutz la'aretz, Ois Katan Tes, the city that the caravans from the city that has the plague travel to, that city also has to fast, even though they're very distant one from the other. Afal P, says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and test, Lefisha hadever mislave uba imahin, because the plague is going to travel from one city to the other. The plague, unfortunately, is going to be escorted. It's going to be mislave. It's going to be escorted by the travelers that are traveling from the Medina that has the plague to the other Medina that the caravan goes to. Those are going to be the hosts, and they're going to bring the virus, chas v'chalila, to the other city. Eis Katan Yud, this is true even though they're distant one from the other. If caravans do not travel from that city to another city, then the distant cities don't have to fast. However, the cities right around the affected city, they do have to fast. But they don't have to blow shofar. Why do they fast? Because if you're very close to a city that's being afflicted, you have to join them in their tzara, and you have to fast on their behalf. For the same reason we're going to see later today, Mir Hashem, that if a city was affected by a collapse, buildings are collapsing, then the cities that are nearby have to fast. Even though over there it's not a communicable disease, we're not afraid that this mysterious affliction of collapsing buildings is going to travel from one city to the neighboring city. The reason that they have to fast is because as a neighboring city, as neighbors, they have to be mishtatif with the tsar of their neighbors. Now we go to Sif Gimel. 3 lines from the bottom. Let's say a city is experiencing a plague amongst their pigs, the hogs. Misanin, the people have to fast. Why? Because the Mechaber tells us that the physiology of the hog is similar to the human physiology, and therefore it's very likely that a plague that is striking the hogs can also strike humans, and therefore the humans have to fast. Certainly, if there is a plague that is striking non-Jewish human residents, Israel, and somehow it's not striking the Yidden so far, Shemisanim, the Yidden have to fast, because the bottom line is this is a human illness. So if it's striking the non-Jewish population, it can very easily strike the Jewish population. There's no Mishnah Berurah on this Sif. Let's go to Sif Daled. V'chein similarly misanin al hamapolis shebe'ir. We also fast if buildings collapsed. If the city experienced a catastrophic collapse, you have to fast. Ketzad, how do we measure a collapse that you have to fast for? Harei sherovsa be'ir mapolis kisalim beriim. If you have suddenly that in a number of places, walls that were otherwise stable suddenly collapsed, we're not speaking about buildings and walls that were adjacent to the river, where maybe we could say that the moisture of the river somehow undermined the buildings or the walls. We have what seem to be perfectly stable buildings that are of good construction, and now we have a bunch of collapses. Harezet tzara. This is a mysterious tzara, a mysterious affliction. Umisanin, and we need to fast. Umasriyan oleha, and we blow shofar over such a tzara. V'chein, and similarly, al arash, over an earthquake. Val aruchais, and on powerful winds like hurricanes, tornadoes. Shehem mapilin abinyan v'hargim, that knock down buildings and chas v'chalila kill people. Misanim, we need to fast. Umasriyan alein, and we have to blow shofar over these calamities. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Mem Tes Amud Beis, Eis Katan Yud Aleph. Harei sharovsa be'ir mapolis. If there were a bunch of collapses in a city, now the Mechaber says that there was a number of collapses, but he doesn't give us a number. So what's considered rovsa? What's considered that there were a bunch of collapses? Says the Mishnah Berurah, ve'efshir d'shiyura b'shloisha batim. Possibly, he brings down from the Ritva that we should consider 3 unexplained collapses to be rovsa be'ir mapolis, that there were a number of collapses, and now we need to fast. As Katan Yud Beis, we're dealing with kisalim beriim. We're dealing with healthy, stable walls, stable buildings. Avalim hemer uois. If we're talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa, einam bechlal zeh, we don't count that as a mysterious affliction of collapses. It's an old, shaky building. It's a rickety building. That's why it collapsed. Ois Kat Yud Gimel, and they have to be buildings she'enon oimdim b'tzad hanahar. They're not on the riverbank. Avalim oimdim b'tzad hanahar. If we're talking about buildings that are on the banks of the river, alpha pi she'en kisalim beriim, even though they seem to be stable, after the hanar shotaf ben mitachtav es yisaydam. Then we don't count that as being a mysterious affliction, because it could be that the moisture of the river undermined the buildings. Now we go to Nun Amud Aleph Sif Hey. V'chein, and similarly misanin al hachaloim. Excuse me. V'chein, and similarly misanin al hachaloim. We need to fast over illnesses. And this is why earlier in the shir in Sif Beis, I said that over there the Mechaber seems to be addressing what to his mind was an unexplained spate of fatalities. Dever, just a deadly plague. But we don't know what's causing it. It's not that there's a disease running rampant in the city, it's just people are dying. Now over here in Sif A, he talks about disease. We need to fast over disease. Ketzad, what's the case? If suddenly in one city a lot of people are being struck by the same illness, kegain askara. For example, askara, Pirish, what's askara? Chayli Seiger Hagaroin. It's an illness that Nebuch, Chas v'chalila, closes up the throat. It closes up the trachea, the breathing passages. And now somebody cannot breathe. Me'inyan, we can see this from the Pasuk, Vayisachru Mayanois Tahaim. By the end of the Mabul, it says Vayisachru Mayanois Tahaim, that the deep waters were closed up. So askara is when the throat, when the trachea becomes closed up. In English, they tend to teach askara as diphtheria. So if you have a case where a lot of people in a city are being struck by the same illness, or they're being struck by this sickness called charchur, which I don't know what it is, the kayotza behem, or other types of diseases, and people are dying from this disease. This is a terrible tzara that the tzibbur is going through. And you have to decree a fast day, and you have to blow shofar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he's cutting you a dalid. Over diseases, your guys are a tinus and you blow shofar. For who adin, similarly says the Chavetz Chaim, kishe avabua is parchem batinoikos. If chas v'chalila, you have diseases that present with various types of boils and blisters. This could be like a measles, like a smallpox, chas v'chalila, that affects children. Umesim, and children are chas v'chalila dying. Yesh ligzartinus, you have to be geyser a public fast day. Ukfar nitfa slicha al tachlui yiladim, in the Sidurim by slichas, we have special slichas that are written over diseases that afflict children. Ubashla kasav, the Shla writes, the chalechad yavriach banav minoir ba'es hazois. If chas v'chalila there is some kind of a disease that's striking the children of a city, the Shla writes, pack up your children and get them out of the city. Because these are diseases that are communicable among children. So again, quarantine or get out, get away from the illness. Is cotton tezvav. The Mechaber said if a lot of people are being struck by the same disease, the hayu mesim, and people are dying. Ayin lekamei bahaga. He tells us to go fighter and to take a look at the words of the Ramah. The Ramah later is going to say that when it comes to this kind of situation, by a dever, we said what constitutes a dever, where your guys are a tinus, with 3 people die in 3 days, one after the other. Over here, by an illness, the Mechaber says, if a lot of people are being struck by the same disease and people are dying, the Ramah is going to say people are dying, but over here you don't need 3 people in 3 days. A lot of people have the disease, and you see that the disease is a deadly disease. Then already that's enough of a reason to be geyser a tinus and to blow shofar. Dare I say, COVID-19, if a lot of people have it, and you see that a lot of people are dying, that would be something that would be roi if we paskined like this, that we made a tinus, then it would pass that you would make such a tinus. Okay, says the Mechaber weiter. 4 lines down near the end of the line. V'chein chikuch lach. And so too this disease that he calls a chikuch lach, a moist type of boil. Says the Mishnah Berurah Tazayin chikuch, he calls it chikuch, shchin, this is a type of boil, shemischakech adam aleha, that makes a person itch, he wants to scratch, but it's like a moist blister or a moist boil. V'chein chikuch lach, says the Mechaber, hareyu kishchin peireach, this is a type of shchin, v'im pashat baroiv ha-tzibbur, and if the majority of the tzibbur is afflicted by this, misanin, you're required to fast, umasriyan alav, and you blow shofar. Now that's by a moist blister, a moist shchin. Avachikuch yavesh, if it's a dry shchin, tzayak imalav belvad, you're tzayak, you cry out to the Rabbeinu Shalom, but you don't need a tinus. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Yud Zayin, v'im pashat baroiv ha-tzibur, if most of the tzibur is afflicted with this moist type of boil disease, Ayin Babach, take a look at the Bach, Shadaita, it's his opinion, the Bazeh, that by this shchin, afilu einam mesim mimena, even if people are not dying, it doesn't seem to be fatal, it's not lethal, because that's, the Mechaber doesn't say here by the chikuch lach that there are people dying. He just says people are being struck by the chikuch lach. Geyser and tinus, we make a tinus anyway, shashchin lahu, because the moist type of shchin, kein shahaya b'Mitzrayim, is the type that there was in Mitzrayim by the Makis, v'hu kasha kamavis, and it's terrible like death. Achein bazeh be'ina davka kishapashat baroiv tzibur, but in order to fast, it has to afflict most of the public, masha'en kein l'shar chaloyim, which is different than other diseases, where it only has to strike a lot of people in the city, it doesn't have to strike roiv of the city. Says the Ramah, near the end of Sifhei, Hagah, Ube'elu chaloyim, and I alluded to this Ramah earlier, Ube'elu chaloyim, by these types of diseases, ein tzrichin sheyamusu b'shloish yamim zeh hazeh kamay b'dever. We don't require that you see 3 people dying in 3 days in order to be geyser a tinus, like we said in Sif Beis by dever. Shehu ba mikayach shinui avir. Because the dever is something mysterious that's coming from bad air. It doesn't seem to be a disease. So over there, why are we fasting? We're fasting because people are dropping dead. So if you don't have 3 people in 3 days, that's not a dever. But by these diseases, you don't need 3 people dying in 3 days. Why? Because we see the disease. A lot of people are being struck by the disease. And we see that people do die from the disease. So it's a deadly disease. So we don't need 3 people dying in 3 days. These diseases we would fast right away. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he sends us to the Ritva. Shadaita, it's the opinion of the Ritva. Before you're going to fast on a disease, you have to see that 3 people die. It doesn't have to be 3 people in 3 days. Maybe it's 3 people in 6 days. Maybe it's 3 people in 1 day. But you need to see that the disease is a deadly disease. And to establish that it's a deadly disease, says the Ritva, 3 people need to die. Then you see that it's a deadly disease. But it doesn't have to be 3 people in 3 days. Could be 3 people in 1 day. A yoiser, it's 3 people in 6 days. Misanin, you fast. Umasriyan alav, and you blow shofar. Achein. However, from what we see in the Beis Yosef, B'Shema Yerushalmi, Muchach, it is proven, Del'inyan Askara, when it comes to Askara, to diphtheria, even if only 1 person dies, Mis'anin alav, we fast over the disease. Venera, and it would seem to become dafka kishiyarat chayli zela harbe anoshim, that we're only going to be geyser a tinus if we see that many people are being struck by the disease. If a lot of people are being struck by the disease and only 1 person died from the diphtheria, still you're going to fast. You have to be machmer. But if you don't have a lot of people being struck by the disease, then you don't fast. The Lechem Mishnah says you need to see 2 people die. Okay, now we go to Sivav. V'chein similarly, al chaya ra shenishtalcha. If we seem to have a mysterious affliction where suddenly wild animals, evil animals, wild, dangerous animals are suddenly roaming the streets. Now, the words of the Mechaber are shenishtalcha, a chaya ra that has been sent. There's a very nice footnote here, footnote number 14, that kind of gives you the rule to understand this sif. The footnote writes here, "Klala davarhu." The general rule is shekol she'ena chaya yoitzeis migeder tiva. As long as the animal is not acting different than its nature, ein hi nechsheves lemishulachas. It's not considered a shiluach. It's not considered that these wild animals have been mysteriously sent to plague us. That's when we make a tainus. When do we make a tainus over chaya ra? When it doesn't make any sense. If you live in the Poconos and you know that there are bears, and now there are bears, so okay, that's not mishtalachas. That's not that the bears have been sent min hashamayim to plague us. There are bears in the Poconos, and if the loggers are cutting down their habitat, so they're going to encroach on the human habitat. We're talking about when the chaya ra is acting in an abnormal way. It doesn't belong here. There's no reason why it's here. Or it's acting in an unnatural manner. Then something is wrong. Then we're talking about a chaya ra shenishtalcha, a wild animal that was sent to plague us. Then we need to fast and we need to blow shofar. So let's go back to the Mechaber. V'chein al chaya ra shenishtalcha. When it comes to a wild animal that seems to have been sent to plague us, afilu lo hizika, even if it has not yet done any damage, it hasn't done any harm. Ela nireis bilvad, just it was spotted. Mesanin, you need to fast, umasrian, and you need to blow shofar. B'chol makayim, in all places, afilu harachaykim, even people that were far away. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting your test. Afilu harachaykim. The Chavetz Chaim is puzzled by the Mechaber over here. Afilu harachaykim, even the people that are far away. How far away? If a wild animal cropped up mysteriously in some town in Eretz Yisrael, do you need to fast in the United States? So the Mechaber says over here, Tzarchiyin ala Ramah, he asks his kasha, the Chavetz Chaim on the Ramah, Shalo yigia kan rak sheyu b'isei hefrachia, k'mo sheyigia b'sivches. Later on in Sivches, we're going to see that in a similar case, the Ramah says, listen, when we talk about people who are distant from the problem, fasting, we're talking about at least they're in the same kingdom. But we have to put some kind of gvul. We have to set some kind of boundary. Otherwise, you're telling me that the whole world should fast, and that doesn't make sense. He's puzzling. Why doesn't the Ramah set a boundary like he seems to do later on? Okay, let's go back into the words of the Mechaber. So v'chein al chaya ra shenishtalcha, we need to fast when a wild animal seems to have been sent to plague us. Afilu lo yazika, even if it has not yet done harm. El nireis bilvad, it was only seen. Mesanin, we need to fast. Umasriin, and we blow shofar. B'chol makam afilu arachaykim. Avolim eina mishulachas. But if it's not a mysterious plague of a wild animal, it's not that it seems to us that the wild animal was sent min hashamayim to afflict us. Einay ela mikra. So that, like I said, it's like the bear in the Poconos. That's happenstance. Ezahi mishulachas. How do we decide that an animal is considered sent? So the Mechaber gives us some simanim. Nirasa be'ir b'yoyim. If you see a wild animal in the city during the day, harei ze mishulachas. If you see a bear walking down 13th Avenue, that's mishulachas. There's no bears in Borough Park. Nirasa b'sada b'yoyim. But if you go up into the mountains and you see a bear out in the field during the day, so that it depends. Im rasa shnei b'nei adam, if two people together saw the bear and the bear saw them, v'loy barcha mipneim, and the animal didn't run away from them, harei ze mishulachas. That's not natural behavior. Naturally speaking, the animal should be afraid of the human beings. Maybe if it's one person alone, the animal is not afraid. But certainly if there are two human beings, the animal should be afraid and he should run away. He didn't run away, harei ze mishulachas. It's acting in an abnormal way, and then it's considered sent, and we have to fast. But if it's a field that's in a wild area, if it's near the swampy areas where it's very easy for the wild animal to hide, and it sees two people, and it runs after them. So you hear, if you see the animal during the day in the field, so if it doesn't run away from two people, it's mishulachas. But if you see the wild animal in a swampy area during the day, then the fact that the animal doesn't run away from two people doesn't make it mishulachas. It's acting normal. It feels comfortable right by the swampy area because it knows that if it feels threatened, it could just turn around and run and hide. So in an open field, if it doesn't run away from two people, that's a siman that is mishulachas. In a swampy area, it's not a siman that is mishulachas. What's a siman that is mishulachas? If it's rodfa achareim, if the animal decides to chase the people, then it's mishulachas. Loi rodfa achareim, but if it doesn't chase them, then it's mishulachas. If it's in the swamp itself, afilu rodfa achareim and mishulachas. Then even if the wild animal chases the people, it's not mishulachas because that's normal. It's in its home territory. The animal is on its turf, so yeah, it's going to chase you. But if it does chase them and it kills, it mauls both of them and then eats one of them, again, that's abnormal. Because if it was only going to eat one, why did it maul two? The normal derech of an animal is it mauls what it's going to eat. But if Nebuchadnezzar mauls two people in a swampy area and eats them both, then it's not mishulachas. That's normal wild animal behavior. It's on its turf, and because it was hungry, it mauled them and ate them. Not because it was sent min hashamayim as an affliction. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Chaf. If the animal was spotted out in the open field during the day, if it sees two people and it doesn't run away, that's abnormal. If it would be in the open field at night, it makes sense for the animal to be there. Then from the fact that it doesn't run away, that's not a raya that it's mishalachas. It's doing its normal activity. It belongs in the field at night. But in the city during the night, where again it doesn't make sense because even though it's night, but it's in the city, if it seems two people, the normal behavior of an animal is it should be afraid of two people. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, the Rabbeinu Shalom said to Adam, the fear of you in the plural and the terror of you in the plural will be upon the animals. So the animal is afraid of plural. It's afraid of two humans, not of one. So if this wild animal is standing up to two humans, and it's not afraid, so that is a siman that it was mishtalachas. If it's a field that's close to the swampy area, it's saying loymar. The Mechaber wants to say here, if it's an open field near a swamp, if the animal holds its ground in front of two humans, as long as it doesn't chase them, that's not a raya that it's mishulachas, because the animal again is not acting strangely. In a swampy area, it feels safe. Because since the animal is located near the swamp, it's in its turf. You know why it's not running away from the two people? Savra, because it thinks, if the humans will chase me, I'll run into the swamp. So if a wild animal doesn't run from two humans near a swamp, it's not acting strange, it's acting normal. Chav Gimel Ba'agam, if you encounter the animal in the swampy area, Hu Male Kanim, that's an area that's full of reeds, V'Ilones Ketanim, and small trees, small shoots, so it could easily hide, V'Hu Adin Yargodel, or if it would be a forest, if that's where you encounter the animal, if you encounter the animal in the forest, in the wilderness, so then even if the animal chases the human, that's not a raya that it's mishulachas because it's on his turf. Chavdalid, afilu rodfa acharei meinu mishulachas. Tekev dahainu duchta, since the animal is in its turf, samcha daita, it's very comfortable in its own skin, it's very confident, it's on his turf. Verata basrayu, and therefore now you are in the animal's turf, so the animal will chase you. Chafei, va'achla echad mehem, if a wild animal nebach mauls two people but only eats one, revusa heavy, da'afagav da'achla echad mehen, in this case the chiddush is, even though it did eat one of them, you might be tempted to say, if the wild animal mauled two people and ate one, so maybe that's not abnormal. Maybe it was very hungry, so it mauled both people, and then it ate one. It didn't eat the other one because it's full. It's satisfied. It's not hungry anymore. So says the Chafetz Chaim, no. It's still a siman that this animal is mishulachas min hashamayim. It's still considered that it's acting abnormally from the fact that it mauled a second human without consuming him, because that's not normal. Normally an animal only mauls what it's going to eat. Heavy. If an animal mauled two people and didn't eat anything, then it's certainly acting not normal. Okay, let's try to do Siv Zayin. Siv Zayin says the Mechaber, Batim habenuyim bamidbaros uba'arotzos haneshamois. If we have houses that are built in wild areas, you have houses that are built out in the wilderness, in the midbar, or in arotzos haneshamois, in desolate lands, since this is a place where the beasts and the animals roam, you built a house out in the wilderness, so then, im also lagag, if you'll tell me that an animal climbed up on the roof of the house, v'notla tinoik me'arisa, and it snuck into the window, and it snatched Nebuch, a baby, from a crib, pirish mitaktana, a small bed, meaning hina isa eres basil, hareze mishulachas. That animal would be considered mishulachas. That would be an animal that was sent min hashamayim to afflict us, that we have to make a tainus over. But unless it's a crazy case like that, if it's a relatively normal case, if somebody builds a house out in the wilderness and then an animal comes and somehow gets into the house and mauls somebody, that's not going to be considered mishulachas. Rather, these are people who put themselves in danger. You built a house out in the middle of the forest. You decided to put yourself in a dangerous area. You built a house in a safari. So now we're not going to say that if an animal comes and mauls somebody, we have to be geyser atainus because this animal was mishulachas min hashamayim. The animal was sent min hashamayim to afflict us. So we have to cry out to the Rabbeinu Shalom. No, you're stupid. You built a house out in the woods, in the place, in the Chaya's territory. Of course you're going to get hurt. Other types of animals that are sent and do damage, if you have snakes and scorpions, you don't fast and you don't blow shofar for these sorts of problems. Says the Mishnah Berurah. It's called Chavav. Snakes and scorpions that do damage but they don't kill. But if they're of the type that they are lethal, even wasps and bugs, you would fast and you would blow shofar. There are those that say that on the chashim v'akramim, when it comes to snakes and scorpions, even if we have not experienced that anybody died from them, we still have to be concerned that somebody may, and we would fast because of them. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we did most of Nun Amud Aleph. We're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sif Ches Mirza Hashem. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. for Baruch Shesein Yeshua's Refuas and Parnasa to all those in need. Special wish of Refuah Shalema for Shlomo Zalman ben Mesha, Yisrael Tzvi, Ben Ruchama Edel Roiza, and Menachem Aryeh ben Dina Yehudis. Be well.